Hello, readers. Mr. Rossi here again. We're going to be building off what we learned in Lesson 9. In Lesson 10, we're going to use what we know about whole stories and series to figure out how other books in the series may go. So as we are reading, we know that there are other books written by the same author with the same characters, and that helps us figure out how future books may go. And as we are listening to this lesson, I hope that it becomes a little more clear how we can make predictions based on what we already know about the series. So, help me fill in the blanks here. So, I know we're not in school right now, but when we used to come to school in the morning, think about what the first thing you would do. So what was that first thing that you would do? Is it pretty similar from day to day? Could you make a prediction if you were to come back into school, what you think might happen the next day? Well, what about later in the day when we go to lunch? Think about what you would do if you had to go to lunch. Day after day, is it pretty similar? Could you make a prediction based on what you already know on what you think might happen the next day? Well, you see, there are ways that our school day tends to go, and that's kind of the same as series books. Once you've read the first book, you'll start to know how the other books in the series might tend to go. So usually the schedules during the day are pretty similar, whether you're at school or at home. And we can make predictions based on what we already know about those things to help us kind of get ready for what might happen in the future. So, today, I want to teach you that when readers study an author's craft, they don't just notice the way author uses words and language. That is important, like we talked about yesterday, but they also notice the way the whole story tends to go. And once readers get to know a series, they can think, oh yeah, I know how this book is going to go because I know how the series goes. So today, we're going to take a look at Arnold Lobel's Frog and Toad series so that we can see how, because these books are in the same series with the same characters, they tend to go in similar ways, or they tend to be told in similar ways. So the stories usually start off with Toad causing some sort of problem or having a hard time. Things usually get worse before they get better, and in the end, Frog often helps out. So let's take a look at some of the stories that we've already read, like The Kite and Alone, to see if this is true. The Kite. Frog and Toad went out to fly a kite. They went to a large meadow where the wind was strong. Our kite will fly up and up, said Frog. It will fly all the way up to the top of the sky. Toad, said Frog, I will hold the ball of string. You hold the kite and run. Toad ran across the meadow. He ran as fast as his short legs could carry him. The kite went up in the air. It fell to the ground with a bump. Toad heard laughter. 3 robins were sitting in a bush. That kite will not fly, said the robins. You may as well give up. Toad ran back to Frog. Frog, said Toad, this kite will not fly. I give up. We must make a second try, said Frog. Wave the kite over your head. Perhaps that will make it fly. Toad ran back across the meadow. He waved the kite over his head. The kite went up in the air and then fell down with a thud. What a joke, said the robins. That kite will never set off the ground. Toad ran back to Frog. This kite is a joke, he said. It will never get off the ground. We have to make a third try, said Frog. Wave the kite over your head and jump up and down. Perhaps that will make it fly. Toad ran across the meadow again. He waved the kite over his head. He jumped up and down. The kite went up in the air and crashed down into the grass. That kite is junk, said the robins. Throw it away and go home. Toad ran back to Frog. This kite is junk, he said. I think we should throw it away and go home. Toad, said Frog, we need one more try. Wave the kite over your head, jump up and down, and shout, Up, kite, up! Toad ran across the meadow. He waved the kite over his head. He jumped up and down. He shouted, Up, kite, up! The kite flew into the air. It climbed higher and higher. We did it, cried Toad. Yes, said Frog. If a running try did not work, and a running and waving try did not work, and a running, waving, and jumping try did not work, I knew that a running, waving, jumping, and shouting try just had to work. The robins flew out of the bush, but they could not fly as high as the kite. Frog and Toad sat and watched their kite. It seemed to be flying up at the top of the sky. So let's take a look at the second story, Alone. Toad went to Frog's house. He found a note. So remember, I'm sorry for stopping at the beginning of the story, but remember, we're taking a look at this story to see if the two stories have anything in common. If we could predict how the stories were going to go based on what we already know. Alone. Toad went to Frog's house. He found a note on the door, and the note said, "Dear Toad, I am not at home. I went out. I want to be alone." "Alone?" said Toad. "Frog has me for a friend. Why does he want me to be alone? Why does he want to be alone?" Toad looked through the windows. He looked in the garden. He did not see Frog. Toad went to the woods. Frog was not there. He went to the meadow. Frog was not there. Toad went down to the river. There was Frog. He was sitting on an island by himself. "Poor Frog," said Toad. "He must be very sad. I will cheer him up." Toad ran home. He made sandwiches. He made a pitcher of iced tea. He put everything in a basket. Toad hurried back to the river. "Frog!" he shouted. "It's me! It's your best friend, Toad!" Frog was too far away to hear. Toad took off his jacket and waved it like a flag. Frog was too far away to see. Toad shouted and waved, but it was no use. Frog sat on the island. He did not see or hear Toad. A turtle swam by. Toad climbed on the turtle's back. "Turtle," said Toad, "carry me to the island. Frog is there. He wants to be alone." If Frog wants to be alone," said the turtle, "why don't you leave him alone?" Maybe you're right," said Toad. "Maybe Frog does not want to see me. Maybe he does not want to be friends with me anymore." "Yes, maybe," said the turtle as he swam to the island. "Frog!" cried Toad. "I'm sorry for all the dumb things I do. I'm sorry for all the silly things I say. Please be my friend again." Toad slipped off the turtle. With a splash, he fell in the river. Frog pulled Toad up onto the island. Toad looked in the basket. The sandwiches were wet. The pitcher of iced tea was empty. "Our lunch is spoiled," said Toad. "I made it for you, Frog, so that you would be happy." "But Toad," said Frog, "I am happy. I'm very happy. This morning when I woke up, I felt good because the sun was shining. I felt good because I was a frog, and I felt good because I have you for a friend. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to think about how fine everything is." "Oh," said Toad, "I guess that is a very good reason for wanting to be alone." "Now," said Frog, "I will be glad not to be alone. Let's eat lunch." Frog and Toad stayed on the island all afternoon. They ate wet sandwiches without iced tea. They were two close friends sitting alone together. So, if I was to read a new story, like Down the Hill, which is another in the Frog and Toad series, and it's about how Frog and Toad go sledding, I can guess how the story might go. Toad may not want to go sledding because he'll be too scared. Frog will get him to go, maybe even trick him. Toad will go sledding and be really scared, maybe even crash the sled. Frog will find some way in the end to help him and make him laugh. So, did you see how I can think about how the author writes a whole story? I can use that to help me think about how to get ready for the next story. So when I read a new story in a series, I can really make good predictions about what might happen and how the story might go. So let's try it again. This time, let's take a look at some Magic Treehouse books and see if we can find how they tend to go. So we're going to take a look at the beginning of two books to see if we can see how they go. Chapter 1. Are You Serious? Whoo! The strange sound came from outside the window. Jack opened his eyes in the dark. The sound came again. Whoo! Jack sat up and turned on his light. He put on his glasses. Then he grabbed his flashlight from the table and shone it out the window. A white, snowy owl was sitting on a tree branch. "Whoo!" the owl said again. Its large yellow eyes looked right into Jack's. What does he want? Jack wondered. Is he a sign, like the rabbit and the gazelle? A long-legged rabbit and a gazelle had led Jack and Annie to the magic treehouse for their last two adventures. "Whoo!" "Wait a second," Jack said to the owl. "I'll get Annie." Jack's sister Annie always seemed to know what birds and animals were saying. Jack jumped out of bed and hurried to Annie's room. She was sound asleep. Jack shook her and she stirred. "What?" she said. "Come to my room," whispered Jack. "I think Morgan sent another sign." In a split second, Annie was out of bed. She hurried with Jack to his room. Jack led her to the window. The snowy owl was still there. "Whoo!" said the owl. Then he raised his white wings and took off into the night. "He wants us to go into the woods," said Annie. "That's what I thought," said Jack. "Meet you downstairs after we get dressed." No, he says go now, right now," said Annie. "We'll have to wear our pajamas." "I have to put my sneakers on," said Jack. "Okay, I'll put mine on too. Meet you downstairs," said Annie. Jack pulled on his sneakers. He threw his notebook into his backpack. Then he grabbed his flashlight and tiptoed downstairs. Annie was waiting at the front door. They silently slipped outside together. The night air was warm. Moths danced around the porch light. "I feel weird," said Jack. "I'm going back to put on some real clothes." "You can't," said Annie. "The owl said right now." She jumped off the porch and headed across their dark yard. Jack groaned. How did Annie know exactly what the owl said? He wondered. Still, he didn't want to be left behind, so he took off after her. The moon lit their way as they ran down their street. When they entered the Frog Creek woods, Jack turned on his flashlight. The beam of light showed shadows and swaying branches. Jack and Annie stepped between the trees. They stayed close together. "Whoo!" Jack jumped in fear. "It's just the white owl," said Annie. "He's somewhere nearby." "The woods are creepy," said Jack. "Yeah," said Annie. "In the dark. It doesn't even feel like our woods." Suddenly the owl flapped near them. "Yikes!" said Annie. Jack shone his flashlight on the white bird as it rose into the sky. The owl landed on a tree branch, right next to the magic tree house. And there was Morgan Le Fay, the enchantress librarian. Her long white hair gleamed in the beam of Jack's flashlight. So, how would you describe how Magic Tree House books tends to start? Turn and talk to someone near you. I'll give you a couple of minutes. You can pause the video here and talk about how you think that beginning was. What did you notice? What kind of things did the authors do? What kind of things did the characters do? And we'll see if that's similar or if that can help us make predictions to how the next Magic Tree House book will start. So let's take a look at another Magic Tree House book to see if the series, this sort of story, starts in a similar way to the last book. So this is Dinosaurs Before Dark. Chapter 1, Into the Woods. So already I see a connection with the other story. I wonder if you do too. "Help! A monster!" said Annie. "Yeah, sure," said Jack. "A real monster in Frog Creek, Pennsylvania?" "Run, Jack!" said Annie. She ran up the road. Oh, brother, thought Jack. This is what he got for spending time with his 7-year-old sister. Annie loved to pretend stuff, but Jack was 8.5. He liked real things. "Watch out, Jack! The monster's coming!" said Annie. Jack didn't say anything. "Come on, Jack! I'll race you!" said Annie. "No thanks," said Jack. Annie raced alone into the woods. Jack looked at the sky. The sun was about to set. "Come on, Annie, it's time to go home," yelled Jack. But Annie didn't answer. Jack waited. "Annie?" he called again. "Jack! Jack!" Annie shouted. "Come here, quick!" Jack groaned. "This better be good," he said. Jack left the road and headed into the woods. The trees were lit with a golden late afternoon light. "Over here!" called Annie. Annie was standing under a tall oak tree. "Look," she said. She pointed at the rope ladder. It was hanging down from high in the tree. "Wow," Jack whispered. At the top of the tree was a treehouse, tucked between two branches. "That must be the highest treehouse in the world," Annie said. "Who built it?" asked Jack. I've never seen it before. I don't know, but I'm going up, said Annie. No, we don't know who it belongs to, said Jack. Just for a teeny minute, said Annie. She started up the ladder. Annie, come back, said Jack. But Annie kept climbing. She climbed all the way up to the tallest branches. Jack sighed. Annie, it's almost dark. We have to go home. Annie disappeared inside the treehouse. Annie, Jack called. Jack waited a moment. He was about to call again when Annie poked her head out of the treehouse window. Books, Annie shouted. What? Jack said. It's filled with books, said Annie. Oh, man, Jack thought. He loved books. Jack pushed his glasses into place. He gripped the sides of the rope ladder and started up. So, do you think that second book fit with the way that you thought all Magic Tree House tends to start? So, if you can, talk to somebody about that question with someone near you. So think about the two books. How did they begin? What was similar about them? If we were to take a look at a third book, what do you think it would have in common with the first two? So you can pause if you're having a longer discussion. So we are becoming strong at finding lots of things that authors do to make their series so much fun to read. Authors need to keep our attention because if they wrote boring books, then we wouldn't want to read them. So not only can you think about craft moves your author uses across their series, you can also use what you know about how your author writes one story in a series to help us predict how new stories in that series will go. So we're going to work on trying to find things that are the same across our books. So we need to pay closer attention to what's happening in our stories. So as you're reading today, look for those patterns so that maybe you can predict how the story might go. As you can see on our poster on the left, we added a new sticky note that built on from where we left off last lesson. So it says, predict how the story will go, using what you know about the other stories in the series. So as you're reading today, be on the lookout for things that are similar that will help us predict how the next book in your series might go. Happy reading!